Now that we have a grasp of the pronunciation of individual letters, we can string those letters together and phonetically pronounce entire words. So we're going to start with a Greek word that is very similar to the English transliteration. And you can see the capital M is exactly as it is in the Latin alphabet that English uses. And the alpha looks a lot like an A, so we can plop that down. And then we have the third letter, and this is going to present our first challenge. It looks like a P to us English speakers, but it's actually, remember, a rho. So that's an R sound. And then we have the iota, and remember, that's just an I, just like it looks like in Greek, and then alpha again. And if we do what we did in first grade, we take those letters and we just phonetically pronounce them out. We have Maria. That's the name Maria. Maria. Let's try another word. Again, we have a capital M. That's exactly the same as it is in English. And an alpha. That's just like an A. And there we have that rho again. Not a P, it's a rho. It's an R sound. And then we have kappa, which is just like the K. And then we have omicron, which looks and sounds like an O. And then we have the sigma. And the sigma, it looks like a snake, just like the S does in English. And if we sound these letters out, M-A-R-K-O-S, we have Marcos, the name Mark in English. Let's try another name. It begins just like the previous two with a capital M and then a lowercase a. And then we have now the rho, and then we have this letter. This is, remember, theta. This is a TH sound. And then we have the letter A. So if we phonetically pronounce these, we have Martha. So in English, sometimes we take names or words that begin with an I and have other vowels, and we turn that I into a J, almost like we think that there's too many vowels at the beginning of a word, and so that I becomes a J, and Jacob is a good example of that. The word Jacob, and that J in Greek was actually an iota. And maybe you've heard this as somebody speaking a different language. They'll say Jacob instead of Jacob. And that's the situation here that we have in Greek, is that J was actually an iota. We'll look at an example of this phenomenon. We have an iota in Greek and an epsilon. And in English, remember, we think, well, that's just too many vowels. And so that initial iota becomes J, because it's just easier for us in English to pronounce this. And then we have the epsilon, and then remember, that's a rho, and then iota, and then what looks like an X, remember, this is he. And then finally, we have what looks like a W, but is actually an omega. And so in Greek, we have the place Ieriho, or in English, we change that iota to a J. We have Jericho. Let's take another look at an example of a word that begins with iota and another vowel. And that iota then, in English, we make it a J just because it's easier for us to pronounce. And then that omega is an O. This word has a few more curveballs in it. This letter is sigma. Now remember, sigma is the S sound, and just like in English, the sigma oftentimes looks like a snake, except when it is in the middle or the beginning of a word. And you can kind of think of this form of the sigma as the coiled snake. So right now the snake is coiled. When he's at the end of the word, he becomes uncoiled and looks like an S in English. And then we have one of the more confusing letters in the Greek alphabet for an English speaker. This is eta. So it looks like an N, but remember it's E. And finally, we have the phi, which is the F sound, and we have then Iosif or Joseph in English. We'll take a look at another name here. The first letter is the phi, so that's F. And if you'll notice in Greek, the transliteration into English for the F sound is PH. And oftentimes when you see a word in English that uses PH for the F sound, this is a word that comes from Greek, and that PH is the phi sound. And then you have iota, and then remember this letter is the L sound, lambda, and then iota. And then we have those letters that we're familiar with from math class, but they're not pi, they're P, and there's two of them. And then we have Omicron and Sigma. We have Φιλιππος, and in English we drop off that ending there and we have Philip. Let's take a look at our last example for this lesson. First letter is alpha, then lambda, then epsilon, and then we have this letter. This is, remember, xi. It's the KS sound, and in English, this often comes out to being an X, and an alpha. And then we have what looks like a V to us English speakers, but it's actually an N. And then delta, rho, omicron, and sigma. And let's sound it out. Alexandros, Alexander, a great Greek name. Well, congratulations. You have gone from sounding out letters to actually stringing letters together and sounding them out from the Greek.